Chosen. 1. Settle into this moment and allow yourself to arrive fully. Let your breathing slow. Not forced, not dramatic, just steady, like you are returning to your original rhythm. Let the noise of the world soften at the edges as if it is moving farther away, because for a few minutes it does not deserve the center of your attention. This message is not for those who chase attention, validation, or spectacle. It is for the one who has endured in silence. The one who remained upright when life applied pressure from every direction. The one who did not abandon their inner alignment, even when the path grew lonely, confusing, and unrewarded. There is a little spoken truth in spiritual law. Not all victories announce themselves. Some victories happen so quietly that even darkness miscalculates them, because darkness often depends on noise, on visible collapse, on predictable reactions. You were tested in ways that appeared ordinary on the surface, but were profound at the spiritual level. Delays that stretched your patience, misunderstandings that questioned your character, isolation that tempted you to doubt your worth, and long periods where sincere effort produced no visible reward. From the outside, it looked like stagnation. From the unseen realm, it was calibration. You see, ego, whether human or adversarial, relies on predictability. It studies patterns. It anticipates reactions. It expects collapse under pressure. It assumes bitterness will follow injustice. It assumes you will eventually trade integrity for relief. And that is where the miscalculation occurred. You did not respond as expected. Instead of becoming cruel, you became discerning. Instead of becoming loud, you became precise. Instead of becoming reactive, you became rooted. This is why Scripture repeatedly reminds us that wisdom often looks like foolishness to the world. What appears passive is often mastery of restraint. What appears slow is often divine timing asserting itself. There is a line in spiritual teaching that says, God laughs, not in mockery, but in delight, when arrogance believes it has control. Joy rises when divine order unfolds exactly as intended, despite opposition. You were not preserved by accident. You were not spared because you were lucky. You were refined because you were usable. Even opposition served your growth. Even misunderstanding sharpened your perception. Even loneliness taught you discernment that crowds never could. And this is why you now notice something subtle. Your presence carries weight. Your silence communicates clarity. Your boundaries unsettle those who rely on emotional access. This is not pride. This is alignment. And it is precisely why this moment exists. Because what once attempted to disrupt you is now confused by you. What once sought to drain you can no longer find purchase. And what once underestimated you did not anticipate your patience. Let us now move carefully and calmly through the truths behind this shift. Point 1. You passed a test that was never announced. Chosen 1. One of the most misunderstood aspects of spiritual growth is that the most decisive tests arrive without warning. There is no ceremonial announcement, no visible checkpoint, and no indication that evaluation is taking place. Life simply unfolds, and within that unfolding, your responses are quietly observed. These tests do not examine what you say when prepared, but what you embody when unguarded. They measure how you treat others when there is no advantage to be gained, how you conduct yourself when recognition is absent, and how you maintain inner order when outer circumstances are disordered. Many fail this stage, not because they lack intelligence or faith, but because they grow resentful when effort goes unseen. You did not. You continued to act with restraint, dignity, and internal consistency. You learned that integrity is not a performance, but a state of alignment that exists regardless of audience. This is why your growth feels invisible to many. The test was internal, not theatrical. While others waited for validation before committing to character, you committed first and trusted that reality would reorganize itself later. This quiet endurance is rare. It signals maturity of the nervous system and clarity of conscience. You were not rewarded immediately because immediate reward would have interrupted the refinement. Delayed acknowledgement strengthened your independence from external approval. This is why, now, you do not need reassurance to remain steady. The test ended long before you realized it had begun. Point 2. You did not become what hurt you. There is a predictable psychological response to prolonged pain, one that most people never consciously choose yet slowly inhabit. When distress is sustained, especially when it arrives through betrayal, neglect, or repeated misunderstanding, the nervous system searches for a shortcut to safety. Many internalize the injury and unconsciously reproduce it. They adopt the same manipulative patterns, emotional volatility, defensive postures, or moral shortcuts that once wounded them, not because they admire those behaviors, but because familiarity feels safer than uncertainty. You did not follow this path. This was not because you were untouched by pain, nor because you escaped its depth, but because you remained attentive to it. You noticed what arose inside you without immediately acting it out. You observed your emotional responses without allowing them to crystallize into identity. That restraint is rare. It requires awareness when distraction would be easier, patience when reaction would be faster, and humility when ego would prefer justification. Instead of externalizing blame or hardening into bitterness, you processed disappointment slowly and deliberately. You allowed grief to speak without letting it command. You examined anger without turning it into a weapon. You chose understanding over retaliation, not as a moral performance, but as a structural decision about who would govern your inner world. This does not mean you excused harm or minimized what occurred. It means you refused to let harm author your character. Spiritually, this is one of the most disarming outcomes possible. Darkness anticipates replication. It expects that pressure will produce distortion, that injury will echo itself forward through behavior. When that distortion does not occur, its predictive framework collapses. There is nothing to mirror, nothing to amplify. Psychologically, what you demonstrated is known as post-traumatic growth rather than trauma fixation. Your nervous system learned regulation instead of reactivity. Your body no longer confuses intensity with truth. This is why your presence now feels composed rather than defensive, steady rather than guarded. You are not numb. You are integrated. The past exists as information, not as a command signal. It does not dictate your tone, your pace, or your posture. This quiet non-replication, this refusal to transmit what harmed you, is one of the clearest signs of inner authority. Point 3. You learn to move without explaining yourself. At a certain stage of inner maturity, explanation becomes unnecessary and even counterproductive, not because clarity has been lost, but because it has finally been integrated. Early in life, explanation functions as a bridge. People explain themselves to be seen accurately, to be treated fairly, to reduce misunderstanding, or to earn acceptance. It is a survival strategy rooted in social conditioning. Over time, however, you observed a subtle but consistent pattern. Every added explanation diluted your energy, invited projection, or created room for distortion. You realize that explanation does not guarantee understanding, and understanding does not guarantee respect. What it often guarantees is exposure. Gradually, you stopped narrating your intentions in advance and allowed your behavior, choices, and long-term consistency to speak on your behalf. This shift marked a deep transition from external orientation to internal confirmation. Psychologically, it signaled a reduced dependence on social validation and a strengthened trust in your own judgment. You no longer needed others to agree with your reasoning in order to feel aligned. Spiritually, it reflected a surrender to divine timing rather than human approval, an understanding that what is meant to be recognized will be recognized without force. When you stopped explaining, you noticed subtle changes around you. Some people withdrew because access was no longer automatic. Others grew curious because your silence disrupted familiar patterns. A few felt unsettled because the explanation had once allowed them to negotiate, influence, or extract emotional labor. This response was not a problem. It was information. Explanation grants access. Silence establishes boundaries. You did not become distant or secretive. You became selective. You learned that not everyone deserves the backstage view of your inner process. As your inner life gained privacy, it stabilized. Decisions became quieter, not rushed by the need to justify them. Movements became more precise because they were no longer shaped by anticipation of reaction. Without the burden of being understood, you gained freedom of motion. You stopped performing coherence for an audience and began living it internally. In this state, your presence carries more weight than your words ever did. What you do is no longer an argument. It is evidence. Point 4. You developed authority without dominance. True authority does not announce itself with volume or urgency, and it does not lean on intimidation, persuasion, or spectacle to be felt. It exists quietly, almost invisibly, arising from an internal alignment that others sense before they consciously recognize it. You did not arrive at this understanding through abstract philosophy or borrowed ideas, but through lived observation. You watched how those who tried to dominate rooms eventually created tension, how excessive control triggered subtle defiance, and how forced leadership always required constant maintenance. Over time, you noticed a different pattern. Stability outlasts force. Instead of attempting to command environments, you learned to ground them. Your nervous system settled before your words did, and that calm began to regulate the emotional temperature of the space around you. People unconsciously oriented themselves toward your presence because it offered something rare: consistency. Your restraint was not weakness, it was containment. By not reacting impulsively, you created psychological room for others to regulate themselves. This is why your authority feels understated. It carries no theatrics, no urgency, no need for validation. It does not repeat itself to be believed. Psychologically, this posture reflects emotional regulation and a secure sense of self. You're not trying to extract agreement to feel whole, nor are you threatened by disagreement. Spiritually, it reflects trust in an order larger than ego, a quiet confidence that outcomes do not need to be controlled to be meaningful. People respond to you not because you apply pressure, but because your internal coherence exposes incoherence around it. Systems that are misaligned feel revealed in the presence of someone who is aligned. This can create discomfort, confusion, or even resistance, not because you accuse or confront, but because your steadiness acts like a mirror. Some individuals will interpret this as distance, arrogance, or mystery, when in truth it is discipline. You are not withholding, you're centered. This is why your presence can unsettle those who rely on chaos, volatility, or performance to feel significant. It is not personal and it is not intentional. It is structural. Your way of being highlights imbalance without naming it. This form of authority cannot be imitated, rehearsed, or claimed through titles. It is earned slowly through self-mastery, through choosing regulation over reaction, and through the long quiet work of aligning values with behavior. Over time, people trust what does not fluctuate. They follow what does not chase them. They respect what does not need to be proven. Point 5. You respected time instead of fighting it. Impatience undermines many promising paths, not because desire is wrong, but because urgency often arises from fear rather than clarity. And you learned this lesson slowly, sometimes painfully, through lived experience rather than theory. You discovered that forcing outcomes does not accelerate alignment, it fractures it. Each time you rushed, you noticed how small misjudgments multiplied into unnecessary complications. How decisions made under pressure carried hidden costs that revealed themselves later. Over time, pattern recognition replaced impulse. You began to see that timing is not an obstacle to overcome, but a protective mechanism designed to preserve coherence between intention, capacity, and environment. Delays stopped feeling like rejection and started feeling like calibration, subtle adjustments occurring beneath the surface long before visible movement was required. Psychologically, this shift reflected a higher tolerance for uncertainty, a strengthening of emotional regulation, and a reduction in anxiety-driven behavior that once demanded immediate resolution. You no longer needed instant feedback to feel secure. Spiritually, this patience reflected trust in orchestration beyond immediate perception, an understanding that not all progress announces itself loudly or quickly. You learned to wait without stagnating, to prepare without rushing, and to move only when clarity arrived, when action felt inevitable rather than forced. This patience was never passive. It was active containment. You held your energy deliberately, choosing not to leak it through impulsive reactions, explanations, or premature commitments. While others burned themselves out chasing urgency, you conserved focus, sharpened discernment, and strengthened internal alignment. You observed rather than reacted. You refined rather than scattered. As a result, when movement was finally required, you were not depleted or confused. You were rested, composed, and precise. Your actions carried weight because they were not attempts to escape discomfort, but expressions of readiness. Timing became an ally rather than an obstacle, a quiet collaborator that amplified effectiveness rather than delaying fulfillment. This is why your decisions now feel clean instead of chaotic, decisive rather than reactive. You are no longer racing against time. You are working with it. You understand that restraint is not hesitation, and that waiting is not weakness. It is intelligence applied over duration. What once felt like stillness was actually integration, and what once felt like delay was alignment completing itself. Now, when you act, there is no wasted motion, no second guessing, and no urgency masking fear. There is simply movement that fits, arrives whole, and lands exactly where it needs to. Point 6. You became unpredictable to ego. Ego relies on patterns because patterns create certainty, and certainty creates control. It watches closely, cataloging your tone, your timing, and your emotional reflexes, learning how to press specific psychological buttons to elicit predictable outcomes. In the earlier phase of your development, you were readable. You reacted quickly. You explained yourself in detail. You defended your intentions, hoping clarity would resolve tension. That transparency made you accessible, not only to understanding, but also to manipulation. Over time, something fundamental shifted. You slowed down. You stopped filling silence with justification. You began observing situations fully before deciding whether engagement was even necessary. Where reaction was once automatic, you introduced pause. Where emotional display was once expected, you offered composure. This single adjustment altered the entire dynamic. Ego thrives on anticipation, and when anticipation fails, its strategies collapse. Psychologically, this change reflects impulse regulation and executive control, the ability to override immediate emotional responses in favor of long-term stability. It signals a nervous system no longer hijacked by external stimuli. Spiritually, it represents detachment, not apathy, but sovereignty. You stopped allowing external behavior to dictate your internal state. When ego cannot predict your reactions, it loses leverage. Confusion replaces dominance. Attempts to provoke fall flat. Manipulative scripts fail to land because the expected emotional reward never arrives. This does not mean you became cold or distant. You became deliberate. You learned the difference between responsiveness and reactivity. Your emotional economy improved. Energy, once wasted on explanation, defense, and overextension, was conserved and redirected toward alignment, purpose, and inner order. You stopped negotiating your peace for the comfort of others. Without confrontation, without announcement, many forms of psychological pressure simply dissolved. Silence became a boundary. Calm became a filter. Presence became authority. Those accustomed to controlling outcomes through emotional hooks found themselves disoriented, not because you attacked them, but because you no longer played your assigned role. This is the quiet power of unpredictability, rooted in self-mastery. It does not seek dominance. It renders dominance unnecessary. Peace, in this state, is not passive. It is strategic. It is the byproduct of clarity, restraint, and internal alignment. And once peace becomes your default position, manipulation loses its oxygen because there is nothing left for ego to grip. Point 7. You are now operating from inner confirmation. This is the culmination of the process, the quiet threshold where striving dissolves into steadiness. You no longer require external affirmation to validate your direction, because the internal signal has become stronger than the noise outside. Your sense of rightness now originates from within, shaped by lived experience, careful reflection, and a deep alignment between what you value and how you act. Decisions no longer feel like battles or gambles. They arise naturally from clarity rather than pressure. Confidence is no longer something you perform for the world, but something you inhabit, calm, consistent, and unforced. Doubt still appears, but it no longer paralyzes you, because it is processed with discernment rather than feared or avoided. You examine it, extract what is useful, and release what is not, without emotional collapse. Psychologically, this state reflects a cohesive self-concept and mature executive functioning. The mind is no longer fragmented by competing identities or external expectations. You know who you are, what you are responsible for, and where your authority begins and ends. Spiritually, this reflects a union between intention and action, where what you think, choose, and do move in the same direction without inner contradiction. You are not immune to challenge, but you are no longer destabilized by it, because adversity no longer threatens your identity. This is why your presence feels grounded to others. There is no urgency to prove, no hunger to impress, and no reflex to defend. You have moved from seeking permission to exercising stewardship over your life. This is not arrogance. It is responsibility. It is the recognition that your life is something entrusted to you, not something to be negotiated through fear or comparison. It is spiritual adulthood, where freedom is paired with accountability and clarity replaces impulse. Chosen one. This is why joy exists at the divine level. Not because you defeated something external, not because you conquered an enemy or escaped a trial, but because you became something internally. Something stable that does not fracture under pressure. Something clear that does not waver with opinion. Something aligned that does not betray itself. This kind of becoming generates a quiet, enduring joy because it reflects order restored within the soul. Remain steady, not rigid. Remain humble, not diminished. Remain observant, not suspicious. What unfolds next does not require force, urgency, or manipulation. It requires presence. Your full attention anchored in this moment, allowing life to meet you where you are now capable of standing. If you want, I can now continue this path with you, guiding what comes next from this place of grounded clarity.